Hello, friends. Today we're going to talk about another one of my favorite TV shows, Interview with the Vampire. So I know that we're on season 2, episode 6 right now, and I really should have started doing videos on this, a month ago for the second season, but life got in the way and I'm here now. Just to give you some background on my relationship with the show. So I've seen this advertised, like season 1 advertised since 2022. I used to see the commercials while I was watching The Walking Dead. As you know, I was a fan of The Ones Who Live. Anyway, but I just never got around to watching it. But I did see that the actor who played Grey Worm from Game of Thrones was in it, Jacob Anderson. And so I'm like, oh, I'll watch it because I like him, so I'll watch it. But I just never got around to it. And I did watch Interview with the Vampire, the movie, back in the day. If it came out in 1994, I most likely watched it in 1995 on VHS. Probably rented from Blockbuster. And I was pretty young back in the day. I'm not going to tell you how young because I don't want to date myself. But I didn't really have any feelings towards it, good or bad. I just remember that Brad Pitt, Kirsten Dunst, and Tom Cruise were in it. But I couldn't remember anything one way or the other with it. So anyway, so as you know, I watched The Ones Who Live, and I had an AMC Plus trial because even though I do have cable, I wanted to watch things without any interruptions, and I wanted to avoid spoilers on Twitter. Anyway, you don't care about that. I just started to watch the Interview with the Vampire because my subscription was about to run out. So I'm like, let me just watch the show and see what it's about. So I watched the pilot. Obviously, I started with the first episode, and I was instantly hooked. I was so hooked. I honestly think, when I think about all the TV show I've watched in my entire 30 plus years, that's a lot more than 30, but in my entire lifetime, I don't think I've seen a better pilot than Interview with the Vampire's pilot. It had everything. Of course, it had the two main actors, Jacob Anderson and Sam Reed, who are energetic, electric, everything. They work so well together. They work so well on their own. Their chemistry is like amazing. They look amazing. I love those two guys so much. And the storyline obviously was there. The writing was there. The dialogue was there. The setting, Louisiana, I've always wanted to go to Louisiana. Louisiana in 1910, with all the stuff that Louis experienced. I, as a Black woman, wouldn't want to have been there back then. But in terms of everything, in terms of the aesthetic of it, the set design of the houses, everything was just top notch. And we have, Louis, who's like, it's a little bit of a pimp, a little unsavory. But the characters in the brothel were hilarious. Some of the language, some of the dialogue really ooh, wow, they really went there. They said that. And thinking of the incident with Mrs. Bricktop and the alderman, that was a lot. And just everything was just perfect. And of course, there's that famous scene where Louis and Lestat get together, very sexy. a lot more nudity than I was expecting to see. It was a lot, but it was such a good pilot. And of course, I plan on watching the entire thing anyway, but it really compelled me to watch the entire thing. And yeah, instant classic, instantly love the show, still obsessed with it. I love this show. And this is a show I've tried to get my friends to watch it because a lot of my friends, they might watch House of the Dragon or whatever, but it's hard to get them to watch new things. So anyway, I tell everybody on Twitter or anyone who I talk to about TV, you need to watch this show. This show is amazing. Absolutely amazing. Season 1, I love. Season 2, I love as well. It's very different in my general assessment. Season 1 was mainly Louis and Lestat and Claudia. And this year, we're in a different continent. A lot of time has passed. A lot of baggage has come up. There's a lot of toxicity in the history. There's a lot going on, and it's very, very different. And that takes us to this episode today, or the last episode that we watched, episode 6, that has a really long title, if I'm not mistaken. But this is the episode where Claudia gets a companion. So let's go into it. So I'm not going to do a recap, but I'll talk about the main players and how they impact the show, the episode, and what I think about it all. I'm going to start off with the first scene because this is kind of a small part, but an important part. We see Daniel and real Rashid, or just Rashid, as he refers to him in this episode, at the restaurant. And we come to learn that Rashid is actually part of the Talamasca, so he knows Raglan James. That's very interesting, because one thing I always thought is, like, how do Louis and Armand trust this human guy so much? And he is really all up in their business. And, he used to make a lot of comments and interject in the last season. So I always thought that was interesting. And even when I think back to last season, where they had the doctor who was serving Malloy, or helping Malloy, who was apparently a doctor for many of the different politicians. So it's like, how is everyone involved in this thing? And on a tangent, AMC announced that they bought the rights to a lot of the other Anne Rice properties, and that they'll be releasing a Talamasca series next year. So we can see, this is kind of setting the seeds for that, but we don't really talk too much about that going forward, but at least we know what's happening. And this is the first time where we see Daniel. He might actually be in fear that he might not make it out of this interview alive. And Raglan asked him, I sprinkled in a couple hundred questions I want you to ask them. A couple hundred questions? Like, that's a lot. And Raglan sees Daniel as his asset. He's like, I'm not your asset. It's like, maybe you kind of are an asset at this point. So I don't know what's going to happen to Daniel. We'll see. Now let's jump to Paris in the 1940s around Claudia and Madeline. So we see Madeline is in her dress shop, and a woman and two men draw a swastika on her window, and they're heckling her, calling her a traitor because she slept with that Nazi soldier. And so I've come to learn that was very common back in France in the day. It was called the horizontal collaboration. You can go look it up. And those images that we see at the end when she's thinking about her life when she's being turned, where she is brought out to the middle of the street, she's heckled, and her hair is being ripped off, and, she's publicly shamed. That happened a lot during that day. And so we see that there's a man across the street who probably feels the same way towards Madeline. He's just watching as these people are terrorizing her, right? And so we see that luckily nothing happens to Madeline because Claudia is able to intercept. So first we hear a lot of noise on the street. So she killed the man who was just watching. And then she kills the two men who are trying to essay her, and she kills the woman. And she is, at the same time, eating from them. It was very interesting because the shot of Claudia sucking the blood of the one guy, looking at Madeline, looking at her, seeing this horrific scene of all this, her friend, this little girl who is sucking the blood of this man, and she's got blood all over her face, and she looks over like this. That's pretty much exactly the same shot of Lestat in the pilot, where he is sucking the blood of the priest, and he looks up at Louis, and Louis is seeing this garish scene, as he called it, right? So she and her daddy Lestat are very similar. I say that they're very similar in a lot of different ways. Anyway, so she is very calm, saying, I'm going to take care of this. A lot of noise was made. We're in the middle of Paris. We got to be careful. You just stay here. I'll clean it up. I'm very good at cleaning up. Just, you'll be okay. Just, sit tight. And so we know with Madeline, because of what I mentioned before, where she's kind of an outcast, right? So she feels as though she's a town pariah anyway. She has no family. She has no real connections to Paris or the whole community. So she feels like, what Claudia did is a little weird, but, she saved me, so she's a good person. We can see that she's kind of captivated by this whole experience, this whole scene that she's watching. Then later on, when she's asking Claudia, like, what does blood taste like? What does it mean? Blah, blah, blah. And Claudia's like, oh, it's just food for me. It's not really anything that much deeper. And then she offers her her wrist, which is like, oh, so gross. So one thing about this show, I know they suck blood, but sometimes when I watch them sucking the blood, it's like, this is really disgusting. Anyway, that's not the point of this. But again, she and Claudia formed a friendship. I'm going to address the relationship between Claudia and Madeline, because I always kind of saw it as Madeline saw Claudia as like a little cousin or a little sister who she can kind of, be a little mean to and sarcastic to, but she had an affinity for. I never really got the impression that there was like a romantic side to it. And also, I think it's a little different because, like, this actress who we're supposed to understand, she stopped growing at age 14. So she's supposed to look like a young teenager. But to me, she looks more like, maybe a 22-year-old. And I know the actress, I think the actress is about 25. But I understand she's supposed to look like a kid. So seeing as Madeline is kind of viewed as a pariah, kind of like a weird lady anyway, it might not seem so weird that she's with somebody who's supposed to look 14. Again, this might sound completely weird, but just remember that Claudia is actually 40 or 42 years old. So she is not a kid, but she looks like a kid. But that, I'm not even going to talk about that anymore. But you know what I mean? Like, Madeline is seen as an outcast because of the whole soldier situation. And she has no family in France and she's by herself and blah, blah, blah. And Claudia's a vampire. She has eyes like stained glass windows. And Claudia has always felt like a bit of an outsider because Claudia has such a tragic story. Such a tragic story because when she was a human, her mom died in childbirth. Her aunt didn't care about her, used to neglect her. She nearly died in the fire. Then she gets adopted by these two guys who, one is pretty abusive and cutting, and the other one kind of turns a blind eye, Louis. She never had a companion at all. So, she finds it in this lady, whether it's romantic or not. They are technically age appropriate. So there's that. So that's all I'll say about that. And with Claudia, I love Claudia, but sometimes she doesn't think clearly. And that is to be expected because she was turned at the age of 14 and she was raised by not the best of parents, right? So she makes a lot of bad decisions. Even though she's a 40-year-old woman now, she's had a lot of turmoil and ups and downs in her life, from being in Louisiana to taking those years off and encountering Bruce, to killing Lestat, to going to war-torn Europe and seeing weird revenant vampires, and now being in this coven with Armand, who treats her terribly, and this whole coup that's going behind her back that she has no idea about at this point. Anyway, so she, again, is someone who knows the covenant rules and she knows how strict Armand is with it. The idea that, okay, for one, when she tells the lady all the business and Louis comes in, he's like, well, what the hell are you doing and telling her all this stuff? She's in my coffin, blah, blah, blah. And then later on, Claudia asks Louis to ask Armand to turn her. It's like, Claudia, I understand what you want, what you need, and that you're not able to actually physically turn somebody yourself because you are too small, you're too weak of a vampire to do it. But you are skirting all the rules. You have been skirting the rules. You're writing these diaries that a lot of people know about. Santiago knows about it at least, right? So she's not making sound decisions. And I don't know, I wish that she just told Louis about it and Louis could either say yes or no, because bringing Armand into it is just inviting all sorts of chaos. And obviously we see that Armand doesn't end up doing it anyway. Louis does it for her. And so, it's done. And what was very neat about it is that, and one thing they mentioned a lot, and I think in the previous season, is that a lot of these vampires and all these ones that we know about, their creation, their origin as a vampire was brought on by trauma. We know that Lestat was traumatized by Magnus, who jumped in the fire right after he was done, who killed a bunch of lookalikes to him. So that kind of freaked him out. Louis being brought in as a vampire, he was going through a lot of things, and he was kind of a little, in a sense, coerced by Lestat in a way. So that was traumatic. Claudia's was traumatic. Everyone's was traumatic, right? But this one with Madeline, she went in with her eyes wide open. This arguably is better than the human life that she knew. And she understood the concept of having a companion, and she was willing to do that with Claudia. So from that sense, it was a really touching kind of a thing. And even like when Louis was about to do it and she touches his fang, right? It's like, oh, that's interesting. And she got to have her last glass of Chardonnay and everything. So she went in with her eyes wide open, which was nice and very different from everybody else. And we see, as I'm not really sure how much time had passed between her turning and then when they end up at that cafe. But they seem pretty happy together, right? And it's nice to see Madeline happy, but ultimately we care about Claudia, right? Because Claudia has had a very rough go throughout this entire series, right? So it was nice to see her happy, if not just for a little while. Now let's talk about the Coven, in particular, Santiago. So we see that they're at the Théâtre de Vampire, and they're doing this new show. They're doing the rehearsal for it. And while Santiago is doing his monologue, he is communicating with two of the ladies from the Coven who are at the bank that Lestat did business with. And these ladies, he's telling the ladies telepathically to ask them questions about, when was the last time they heard from Lestat and what they say and blah, 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 blah. And so the banker who we met in episode 2, he's trying to be coy with it. But these ladies, at the direction of Santiago, they get him to physically explode basically and tell all the information. So I think part of it was done off screen because we knew that the last time, or at least the last time that man said he talked to Lestat was in January or February of 1940 when they were doing, when he needed money for that big party in Louisiana, the big farewell party. But they got information from him, and obviously we see at the end Lestat is there. So Santiago used his powers to compel Lestat there. But before we even talk about Lestat being there, let's talk about the obvious coup that's going on that Armand either can't see at the time when it was really being formulated, or he has chosen not to see. So, okay, now I'm guessing I'm going to Armand here. Armand, I'm not a fan of Armand for several different reasons, but I do not know about him. He is so shifty to me because I know that he's a very powerful person. He can stop time. We saw when he put all the Coven's head on the table when they were at that restaurant. He is a very powerful person. So I can't say that he didn't know from the jump what was going on. We know at the end he does, but or maybe it was a big long game he was playing on Louis. I don't really know. Again, with him, everything is so shifty. But yeah, Santiago was orchestrating everything, and we see it really comes to a head later. So I guess maybe I'll talk about Armand and Louis. So I think I'll end up doing reviews on the entire series, like last season and the episodes of this season, maybe in a little bit. But I have a lot of feelings about Armand and Louis and their relationship versus Louis' relationship with Lestat. But let me just say that these vampires are so messy. They are some of the messiest people ever. And I guess when you live to be 100 plus years old or 500 years old, mess is natural. But everything is messed up. Louis and Lestat have such ambivalent feelings towards their relationship, because in some ways I love their relationship, but in many, many others, I'm they are terrible for each other. They are toxic. They are not a good match, but they are a good match. And I love them. And I love that Lestat is back. But anyway, But Louis and Armand, I feel as though, like, I think Daniel mentioned this, I feel as though Armand is a 70-year rebound. Like, I don't really feel the passion or anything between the two of them. And one thing I would say, I just thought this a couple of days ago, is, I think the main difference between Lestat and Louis and Armand is that with Lestat and Louis, everything was pretty straightforward. It was right out there. As messed up as everything was between them, it was there, it was tangible, it was understandable. I'm not saying that, like, Lestat dropping him from the sky was understandable, but everything was right there in front of your face with the relationship. With Armand and Louis, everything is so coded. Everything is kind of danced around. Their weird dom sub relationship. Like, I'm not even just talking about like in the bedroom, but even in terms of how they just interact with each other. Who's maître today, or maître, I can't get the French right, but who's master today, who's master tomorrow. It's so weird. And it just seems as though it's a game that they're playing. And okay, now I'll kind of jump into Louis. Louis, I love Louis. I am a Louis apologist. Louis can't do anything wrong, except he can, and he does often. But I love him so much. I'm very protective of him. But he's not perfect. Who is perfect, right? So let me think. So with this episode, Louis kind of got on my nerves a little bit. And it's so funny. Last week, when I was watching the episode and watching the present day stuff in Dubai when he's talking to Daniel, is when I really realized how kind of like arrogant he speaks sometimes, or like highfalutin he speaks sometimes. And really, he's been speaking that way the entire series during these interviews. But it really kind of jumped out to me last episode. And it could have been because Daniel said, grab that. And then he said, well, why are you talking about grab what? And he says, well, you keep on saying one's time or one's feelings. Like, those are distancing type of words. Like, you're not really connecting with the words when you refer to yourself in third person as an idea, right? So maybe that's what kind of jogged me to think, Louis actually does kind of sound pompous sometimes when he talks. And even I was thinking back, so I just rewatched episode 5 from last year when Louis and Lestat were in the house when it was very messy, when Claudia left and Louis was pretty depressed. And Lestat's like, oh, we should go out to see Louis Armstrong. But Louis was ignoring him, saying, oh, he was reading some book. He's like, oh, the lack of metaphor is so sublime, or something like that. And Lestat says, you sound like every stuck-up university student who I eat, or something like that, right? So he's always had that degree to him. But I feel as though it's really been pronounced in last week's episode, again, present day in the interview. And in this episode, it was really pronounced too. So again, going back to what I mentioned before, I totally understand why Louis was upset that Claudia divulged all this information about like who she is, what she is. Madeline's laying in Louis' coffin, like, that's kind of pushing the limits. But when he's like, oh, I'm going to break her bones and stuff, like, Louis, you're not going to do any of that. Anyway, so when it gets to the point where he's asking Armand to change her, and then he says, Armand, why don't you do it? Could you imagine what our life would be like without me having the burden of her? Which I thought was kind of cruel. Like, I understand that he was trying to sell it to Armand, but he didn't need to say it that way, especially when he knew that Claudia was an earshot, right? Because that is probably, I know actually, that's the way Claudia has felt her entire life with Louis. And then when she confronted him about it, he said, oh, well, I just did that to jog him to do it. And then she asked, like, did you mean it? And he said it didn't matter. So I'm like, oh, Louis, that's not very nice, right? Later on, when Armand finds him, after he's done the deed, he has turned Madeline. He's in the room by himself. He's outstretched on the sofa, and he's got that big gash in his wrist from the blood that he fed to Madeline. And he's talking to Armand about the transition and how he didn't care. Like when he felt that he was losing Claudia to her new companion, he felt it, but he didn't care. He kept on saying, I did not care. And I'm like, part of me wonders if that's actually true, which I think there's a very good chance where he didn't really care, because he hasn't necessarily been like the best father brother to Claudia this entire time. But I don't know. In the way he delivered it, I wasn't very happy with him, because I did think it sounded a bit callous, even though Claudia wasn't in the room at the time. But yeah, I don't know. Louis, I love Louis again. I love him, but I haven't been very impressed with him. And I think that mainly has to do with this relationship with Armand and what that's doing to him. And not that that's Armand's fault, because Louis is a grown man. He can decide what he wants to do. Let's go to present day Louis Armand, when they're talking about what to put on the bare wall now that they sold the triptych. So again, Louis being very passive aggressive, sniping a little bit, saying, oh, well, we can put that Fred Stein painting up, or that Fred Stein photograph up, since, you clearly seem to like it. So he's sniping at Armand for good reason, but Louis just come out and say it. It finally comes out that Louis knows that Armand erased his memories from 1973, and he's upset about it. And then Armand says eventually, you have no right to be upset, because you asked me to erase those memories. Mind you, he did mention this a lot later. It wasn't in that same conversation. He mentioned it later. And because Armand is the way he is, I don't know if I believe that Louis requested that he erase the memories. Then Armand mentions to Daniel, because Daniel's chiding him, of course, and he's saying, why do I owe you the shame of what I did? My moment of cowardice, which is a very light way of describing, him turning a blind eye to Santiago's coup. But, whatever. Let's deal with semantics later, I guess. But, yeah, so clearly, I don't know. Again, I don't understand the real relationship between Armand and Louis, other than they might get off on the sense of flipping the whole dom-sub complexity of everything of the relationship, for the past 70 years. So one thing I'll mention, when Louis is in Armand's office and he's talking about how excited he is about how he sold his photographs and how he wants to buy stocks, he wants to buy property, he wants to buy a plane, he wants to fly the plane because he's going to be the first vampire capitalist and everything. So he's very high on himself, and he's more like the Louis that we saw in the 1910s in Louisiana. And Armand is busy writing the script for this terrible play, or reviewing the script for the play. And he tells him I want you now, right? Because again, he's using his sub powers that they have. And Armand says, oh, I know I'm busy. And then he tells him that line, you know what it is. That really woo, that was intense. Louis was really showing his dominant side in that situation, which was wow, this show sometimes really pushes the envelope. Anyway, towards the end, where they're at that bar where Armand and Louis and Claudia and Madeline are there, and they're just talking about their travels and how basically Claudia and Madeline are going to go on a trip, but Madeline is the destination, so she's got her person, right? So she's very happy. They're both smiling. Madeline's got the stained glass eyeballs now, so everything is good. Madeline is telling Louis how she can feel him and that she knows he loves Armand and blah, blah, blah. So it was interesting because I guess, she can pick up a vibe. She can say she feels whatever she feels, but because they are maker fledglings, she can't hear what Louis is thinking. So maybe she just sees it, or maybe she's reading Armand. But that scene was it was interesting because I felt as though she was kind of harping on that more than you would expect. And maybe that's a matter of her feeling she can just say whatever she wants or whatever, which she can. But it was very interesting. And then, of course, we see Armand. He goes up and he's going for a smoke or something. But he goes up to the entrance and we see Santiago come in with a burlap sack. And then we notice that everybody in the bar freezes. And then we see the other Coven members come in, put bags over the three of them at the table. And then later on, of course, we see that they end up on the stage on trial in the Théâtre des Vampires' first matinee show. And they are listed as being on trial again. And Madeline, Claudia, and Louis. And then we see that the Irish guy goes downstairs. Sean, I think his name is. And he tells one Mr. Lestat de Lioncourt that he should be up in a few minutes. And we see Lestat. And I love to see Lestat. Of course, Lestat's there with a cigarette. He's got his hair all like coiffed. And he's looking very intensely at the mirror. And cut to black. Next week, we'll have to see where things pick up. I really enjoyed episode 6. It's a great setup for what's going to happen next week. And without giving any spoilers, because I don't know any, and as someone who watched the movie and doesn't remember anything about it, but of course, gleaning everything we know from the conversations that are having in present day and what happened in 1973, Claudia is no longer with us. We know that in whatever form that is. I don't think it's going to be a good episode for Claudia next week. I think I might be crying next week after what happens. I have so many questions. The things in Paris happen in the mid to late 40s. And we know in 1973 that Lestat still loves Louis. So I don't think here in the 40s that Lestat's going to do anything to hurt Louis. So, and we know Louis is still alive, obviously. And we know from last year that even though Lestat kind of can't stand Claudia, he understands that Claudia means a lot to Louis. And I don't think, for even just selfish reasons, I don't think that Lestat would do anything to hurt Claudia, like in a fatal way, because that's his fledgling, like that's his daughter, really. And I don't think he would do anything to her just for that, even though he can't stand her. And the reason why he can't stand her is because he and Claudia are a lot alike in a lot of different ways. So I'm just really curious again. The trial goes down in the 40s, and let's just say Claudia doesn't make it out of it. How does Louis forgive Armand enough to still be with him in 2022, right? Because that's present day, right? So I don't really understand, unless, of course, Armand did something to erase a lot of that history. I'm really curious to see how that all shakes out, because it doesn't really make any sense to me that he killed his sister-daughter or was instrumental in the killing of his sister-daughter, and which I think, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't really know how that would work. But I guess I'll find out by next episode or the finale in a week and a half. I don't know. Let me know. What did you think of this episode? How do you feel about Armand? What is the deal with Armand and Louis' weird relationship? Is Louis a delinquent father, brother? I think he is, but I still love him. He can't do any wrong. And yeah, I would love to know what your thoughts are on the trial. Like, what is going to happen? I have some high-level ideas just based on the narrative that's been presented, but I don't know. And if you've happened to have read the novels or saw the movie back in the day, just don't say anything about that, because even though the show could deviate from those two iterations, I just don't want to be spoiled. So I would appreciate if you could take that into consideration. So I'll be back here next week with with a review of episode 7, and then the subsequent week about episode 8, the finale. So I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did making it, and I'll see you later here on I See Melanie to talk about my favorite show, Interview with the Vampire. All right, see you later.